Mary, you had mentioned, was it the verse out of the book of Job, was it?
Oh, sorry, yes,
That's in Psalms 19, I believe you were speaking of.
Is it Psalms 19? Okay.
Psalms 19. So here we are. This is December 5th, 2021. We're going to talk about the Mazzaroth. The word Mazar, Mem Zayin Resh, means to spin or turn, which can also mean to become corrupted. It's translated constellations. But Mary, could you go ahead and read that as an opening in Psalms 19? This is one primary. It's also in the book of Job. Maybe, Greg, I think you have that available. Maybe you could read that too, just so people get an opening address on the subject. We are not talking about astrology, but astro, meaning the stars, like astronaut or cosmonaut, talking about the design of the cosmos. We certainly are discussing that. But anyway, go ahead, Mary.
The heavens declare the glory of El, and the sky displays what his hands have made. One day tells a story to the next. One night shares knowledge with the next, without talking, without words, without their voices being heard. Yet their sound has gone out into the entire world, their message to the ends of the earth. He has set up a tent in the heavens for the sun, which comes out of its chambers like a bridegroom, like a champion. It is eager to run its course. It rises from one end of the heavens. It circles around to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat. The teachings of Yahweh are perfect. They renew the soul. The testimony of Yahweh is dependable. It makes gullible people wise. The instructions of Yahweh are correct. They make their heart rejoice. The command of Yahweh is radiant. It makes the eyes shine. The fear of Yahweh is pure. It endures forever. The decisions of Yahweh are true. They are completely fair. They are more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. They are sweeter than honey, even the drippings from a honeycomb. As your servant, I am warned by them. There is a great reward in following them. Who can notice every mistake? Forgive my hidden faults. Keep me from sinning. Do not let anyone gain control over me. Then I will be blameless, and I will be free from any great offense. May the words from my mouth and the thoughts from my heart be acceptable to you, O Yahweh, my rock and my goel.
That last word, I believe, is Gimel Aleph Lamed, correct? Which is translated Redeemer.
Hallelujah.
So here I would pose one rhetorical question. Okay, so the constellations are silent. They have no audible voice. Of course, there are those people who have recorded the stars singing in different wavelengths. But that psalm makes it sound as if the testimony, the witness, the message of the stars are quite clear, and that they're profitable, of good benefit, both practically, meaning for our the way we live, and also emotionally, mean to build us up. But yet, we have no clue what these things are actually saying. If they're saying anything at all, they're images of Greco-Roman titans, what people might call Elohim Achrim, false gods, gods of others, other cultures, testimonies of other cultures' grand fantasies, mythologies, fables. How do any of those stars or constellations declare the glory of Yahweh, the Elohim, who made them? Years ago, I stumbled across a book, Witness of the Stars, Testimony of the Stars. E.W. Bullinger, a guy named, I think it was Joseph Seiss, S-E-I-S-S, I think. And then there was Francis Rolleston, wrote a book in the late 1800s called just simply Mazzaroth, or Mazzaroth, which is the Hebrew word for constellations. But that's all conjecture, is it not? Isn't it their artistic license of analyzing what those images are? So Greg next week is going to be talking about his particular aspect of the study. I'm going to talk about a different angle on things, not just reiterating Bollinger and Rolleston here today in a moment. But Greg, do you want to describe, you can even turn your camera on if you want. Do you want to describe what you're going to talk about next week and read from the book of Job here, as you had mentioned before?
Sure. Yeah, I think, I'm not going to really get into Bollinger's type of stuff, but I'm going to do it more from the Torah perspective and from the overall encompassing story of the wedding and how it relates to the Passover lamb, making the sacrifice, paying the dowry at the time, making the offering to the father for the bride, and then the bride during unleavened bread, how she cleanses herself and makes herself ready, and then in Shavuot they take the vows and getting prepared for the wedding, and then the husband leaves and returns or leaves to go to prepare a place for her, and then when he returns, the trumpets will be blown and the king will arrive, and then they will get married at atonement on the Day of Atonement, and then they will spend eternity together forever at the Feast of Tabernacles. So I'm going to do it from that wedding perspective as far as what the Mazzaroth tells in that story.
So you're suggesting that the staging of the 12 constellations tells that particular story.
Correct.
And I'm imagining that you're starting at Aries because you mentioned about the Passover ram.
Yep. Yeah, it started at the beginning of the year. Yep.
Okay, so there is a little issue, just to say, first of all, the constellations are in a circle, a belt, what they call the zodiac. The word zodiac is not an evil word. It's where we get the word zoological or zoo from the Greek word zoe, which means to be alive, to be a living. So here's 12 living creatures. Only one of them's not living. One of them happens to be a scales of justice, of balance. Brings to mind the word mishpat, mem shin pei tet, but scales of balance are not a living creature. But other than that, so there's a thing called the progression of the equinoxes, which is 26,000 years, just about. A particular constellation being the primary one in the sky at a certain time.
I'm interrupting intentionally. And Victoria, can I ask you to turn off your camera, please? And then I just put the new notes up in the chat if people want to follow along there. One of the pages is upside down.
The progression of the equinoxes. Hey, Paul. The progression of the equinoxes being almost 26,000 years means that at any particular time, there's a certain constellation. Let's say it's at the vernal equinox, the spring equinox. There'll be a certain constellation on the horizon, let's say at sunset. And it takes almost 2,000 years. And then there's another constellation at that moment, the vernal equinox at sunset. And then in another 2,000 years, the next one. And to run through all 12 is nearly 26,000 years. So it's kind of like we have a grand clock face. The typical clock that we're familiar with, analog style, has 12 at the very top, and then they have the digits 1 through 12. So there's 12 constellations in a circle. That's kind of a mirror image of the stars of the cosmos. Some say, according to, I think the man's name was Usher, back in the 1800s, that he determined that if you look at the chronology of the generations since Adam, humans have only been on the earth now about 6,000 years, pretty close to exactly 6,000 years. From the day Adam was formed from the dust of the earth, breathed into life, and placed in the Garden of Eden is pretty darn close to 6,000 years as of now. Other people have studied the same genealogies and determined that The same accounts of the generations can total close to 10,000 years. The Egyptians claim to have been around for, I think it was 15,000 years. Gerald Schroeder, I forget what this book was called. Science of God was what it was called. He's an astrophysicist. He says that you can measure the background radiation of the furthest, darkest place in outer space, and it reads at 15.8 billion years. But why are these different discrepancies as far as time? Well, you know, Einstein, time being relative and all, but why, if humans have only been around for 6,000 years, or say 10,000 years, why would there be a 26,000 year one cycle around on the clock face progression of the equinoxes? Whoever built, of course, we know that Yahweh claims to be the guy that built it, but whoever built the clock in the sky gave us a reference of one cycle being 26,000 years. What are we supposed to do with that information? The reason why we're starting with Aries, which Rolliston brought up, which Bullinger ran with, is because at least at a certain phase, and again, every 2,000 years it changes, but at a certain phase, at a certain time, it was the ram in the Greek known as Aries, which was the primary constellation. Do you have a better way to describe that, Greg?
Well, I mean, I think there's I guess two different starting points. There's the starting point of creation, which I've understood that to be Adam and Eve, which is represented by Gemini. So that would be kind of the beginning portion of that first age. And then we move into the age of Taurus. And that's where it's significant to have, you know, we see a lot of cultures and stuff sacrificing bulls or worshiping bulls. And that's why Israel offered up a bull when they were coming out of Egypt. And then from that age, they moved on into Aries. And so Aries was the age of the lamb, and when the sacrificing of the lamb became a thing. And so Aries is the beginning of our calendar year. And so that's where that story begins, from the Passover perspective of the calendar year. But from the grand clock would be Gemini, Gemini. So it goes from Gemini to Taurus to Aries, and then into Pisces, and the fish, you know, multitude of fishes. And so we are kind of on that cusp of moving from Pisces into Aquarius, which is the outpouring of the spirit of the truth, of the resurrection, watering the ground, the resurrection coming up. So we are now in that period, that age. And so the grand starting point would be around Gemini. We were in that age, if you will, and then from a calendar each year we start off in Aries, and that's when in Exodus 12 he says, you know, this is the beginning of years for you.
Have you ever noticed when you're watching a film or even seeing a car on the highway, you know that the wheels are spinning one direction, but yet the appearance is that the hubcap is spinning in the opposite direction? Like if you see wheels on a Wells Fargo wagon, they almost look. Well, as I was reading through Rolliston starts with Aries, similarly to what Greg said, but the next constellation is not Pisces, it's Taurus, and then Gemini. It's going the opposite direction. So why are you, could you explain, why are you saying that you're correlating the progression, the sequencing in a certain direction, and I'm sitting here based on what I read in Rolliston, reading them the completely opposite direction? Again, we've got a wheel in the sky.
Before you answer, Greg, can I just interrupt? Like, I'm going to edit this piece into the beginning. Who are you and why are we talking to you? You have a channel called YahSplain, and then just tell us. Sorry, we're on the Eriktology page, and so people know who you are and that you got some credibility here. I'm going to edit what I just said out, but if you would just introduce him, Eric, that'd be great.
Go ahead, Greg. You can speak for yourself better than I could speak for you.
Okay, well, hi, I'm Greg. Yeah, I do have a channel, YahSplain. I just, I'm just the simple disciple who studies the Word and read several books on this topic. I am by no means professional or have it locked down. So, Kurt asked about the Mazzaroth. I've mentioned it several different times, and listening to Eric's teachings and stuff, I really see that, from the Mishkan pattern here on earth with the earthly temple, there's also this pattern in the heavenly temple. And so anything that's in the sky and the heavens above is the heavenly temple. It's the heavenly scroll. And so I perceive that word is written in the heavens. And so we see a lot of that which is below, so is above from this heavenly scroll. And so that's the heavenly temple that's above us. And so discussing these ages, and to your point, Eric, about it's a wheel within a wheel. So that's, similar to what Ezekiel is talking about. So when we are standing on the earth at night, we see the constellations going from east to west. So that's the appearance. That's the wheel that's going this way. And then through the ages, the wheel is going in the opposite direction. So it has to do with perspective and where we are going through the ages, our placement, versus what you see throughout the calendar year, going in one direction and then through the ages in the other direction.
So to reiterate, as we look up into the sky, if we look at Polaris being in the center, like if you take a camera and open its lens and take a long exposure shot, you'll see tracks of the stars moving in a circle. And so the progression of the constellations past a certain point, you might say, on the horizon, is a series that are locked in to a very specific sequence. But if you regard the progression of the equinoxes, which one is on the horizon at any particular moment, it's going to go the opposite direction. That's what you're basically saying, right?
Correct.
So let me just mention Kerry Alexander in Oklahoma has done quite a study on the constellations, Mazzaroth. I don't have his exact study. I won't speak for him, but he'd be a guy to, he's also done some songs, some music, Kerry Alexander. And praises the Yahweh band, as I think he was had some songs in that. Anyway, there's also Andrew Gabriel Roth, who wrote a book called Wheel of Stars, if somebody's interested in this subject. John Dilday of Virginia, who is now past tense. I was doing a study with him. I had mentioned before, he was avid explorer of these stars and meanings and what was going on. And we had determined to do a whole study that we were going to publish and put on the road, which hasn't happened, regarding looking at the 150 brightest stars names, putting them into Hebrew phonetics, determining if there's a way to read a message just by the names of the stars. Just so people know, we're just trying to give a setup of why and how of this study. Why mentioning these things is to say, for Greg to say, hey, I'm going to interpret the stars as if it was talking about the wedding. The wedding between who? Yahweh and Israel that happened at Mount Sinai? Or was that a wedding? Or is it talking about Jesus Christ in the church that's coming in the future? Or is it the traditional Israelite, Hebrew cultural wedding ceremony? Just real quick, Greg, how do you see the players of the wedding? It sounds similar to the parable that Yeshua gave us about the 10 bridesmaids, but there was no mention of a bride in that parable. So what are you using as your reference point of this story?
Well, it's the overall encompassing story of the bridegroom coming out of his chamber that she just read in Psalm 19. And so the sun, S-U-N, courses through each chamber. The sun, S-O-N, is also this, which is the S-U-N is kind of analogous to the S-O-N, right? And so the sun is making his course through each chamber. And so he is as a bridegroom. And so John the Baptist says, this is the bridegroom. And so he is the bridegroom, and the body, the believers, the if you want to call them church, Israel, those who believe in Yahusha, and follow his word are the bride. And so he is the one that's written about in the stars, telling that's going to defeat the enemy, defeat the dragon, and rescue the bride, and end up forever in the heavenly realm. And so it's metaphors.
So one might look at Shakespeare and say, boy, you know, that story about Romeo and Juliet or King Lear or Hamlet, yeah, they were specific stories regarding possibly real people, but they stand as iconic archetype narrative stories, which you could make 1,000 movies about using the same plot line, just spun in a different era, a different context, a different family, different set of names. But there's some stories that we have which ring true within us. And this one that you just mentioned about a bridegroom going away to prepare a place, his bride being shanghaied by an adversary, and him coming back to beat up the adversary and take his bride for his own, that's your basic plot line, which probably has been played out 1,000 times, maybe 10,000 times in different stories around the world. Why? Well, it goes back to say, where did Shakespeare come up with some of his? But if you know Shakespeare, you realize since the 1600s, Shakespeare's stories have been retold in all kinds of different cultures and all kinds of different movies, but the same struggle, the same conflict, the same type of resolution. And yet now, if you go back to the stars, it's like, well, there's a principal story. As a matter of fact, if the stars were designed by Elohim as a story, then that's the first story ever told. And so somehow it's ingrained within human consciousness, in our, you might call it an intrinsic psyche, not even one that had to be learned by somebody telling us, but because, you know, we've talked about this idea of a fractal pattern. So if the story in the stars is a fractal story, a fractal pattern type of a thing, because the earth is made up of the stuff, the same composition as the rest of the universe that comes all from the alphabet, and so is humanity, and so is human consciousness, then you might say, if we knew how, that's where I'm getting at, if we knew how to read the stars, it's a story of humanity. It's a story of ourselves. It's a primal story. It's not necessarily, oh, that's that man, Jesus Christ, and his church of the New Testament. Well, is the bride Israel? Is it 12 tribes? Look at Jeremiah 3, and Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, said that he divorced, of course, that's the English word, shalach, shin lamed het is the Hebrew word, which means to send away or banish into exile. Is it the same as a legal divorce that we know of, even though it's translated? But the idea is, are we talking about humanity? Are we talking about an individual? Are we talking about a specific people group? Maybe all of those are fractal pieces of the exact same story. So I'm just trying to set up and show that if you look at Bullinger, Andrew Gabriel Roth, Greg's take, what I'm going to talk about today, they all might be just as valid, their perspectives. And there's no way to know for sure which direction to read the stars, or the constellations, you might say, or who it's about. But if we take as a basic, essential, planned purpose for there to be constellations, based on what Mary was just reading in Psalms, we can take it, though we can't zero in and say, this is exactly what it is, and all you other guys are wrong. We're taking it as saying the creator of the heavens and the earth put something there to ring, to resonate as truth, as a reality in the inner being, so that, you know, we talked about the solfeggio tones in the past and resonant vibration, a certain frequency. So if you have guitars hanging on a wall and you strum a certain note on another guitar, the same strings that are keyed to that same note will start sympathetic vibrating with it. So something about the truth in the story, once we lock onto it, should resonate within us as the truth. Greg, just real quick, and then I'll move on to this. Do you have a reference of the book of Enoch in terms of supposedly the originator of the storyline? And also, I was going to have you read that passage out of the book of Job that talks about these things, also giving credibility to the study of the stars. And I say this because a lot of people have heard that to even regard the stars at all is heresy, is idolatry, is warned and commanded against by Yahweh, when he smacks the stargazers and those who set out incenses and, regarding the powers of the heavens.
What do you mean, a reference from Enoch, like a scriptural reference, or?
Well, no, I didn't know if you have done the study on Enoch enough to give him the credibility for having handed us the regard of these stars, and then also there's a certain couple verses in the book of Job that make reference to the regard of the stars. And I'm saying this as a saying that even in Scripture, though Enoch is not considered, it's pseudepigrapha, it's a pseudo Scripture. It's not regarded as the holy canon of the King James collection, but then also the book of Job is.
No, I mean, from Enoch's perspective, I think, there is a lot of language in there about the heavenly tablets and the courses of the constellations and the stars and the moons. And that's kind of one of the things I'll touch on next week is the Enochian zodiac, the calendar. And that's something that was found actually in one of the synagogues, I think it was Aleph Bet in Israel, just north of Israel, that they had on the floor. And so utilizing what we understand from Enoch and utilizing what we understand from the zodiac wheel, or the wheel within a wheel, the Enochian zodiac, we can understand that there's 4 cardinal points and that there's 3 periods of 90 days. I mean, it helps us to solve the calendar problem, which doesn't really help resolve it because there's still issues with it, because an Enoch teaches 364-day calendar. And so, but that is tied around the 3 months of 30 days and then 4 intercalary days at each one of these periods. And so it talks about in Ezekiel, and it talks about in Revelation, it talks about the lion, and it talks about the figures, the creatures that he saw was a lion and an eagle and picture of a face and one of a bull. So we've got Leo, we've got Taurus, we've got Aquarius, and we've got Scorpio, which is now what we see as a scorpion, but is believed to have been an eagle in the past. And so there's that correlation to understanding the celestial calendar of when we are supposed to participate in the Moedim and these particular events throughout time that the Father has given to us. And that's one of the things is the Shagaga is, the circle dance, resembling this reflection of the heavenly temple above down at the bottom. And so, Israel was supposed to enter in through one of the 4 gates, and they were all supposed to go in a specific direction. And so we can glean a lot from the book of Enoch to help us understand our Moedim and when we are supposed to participate in these festival events. And so there's a lot there, probably more than we can discuss in this amount of time, but that's my understanding from the book of Enoch, where we can glean a lot from there, and understanding the heavenly tablets and understanding that this stuff was written from the beginning in the heavens.
So you mentioned about the circle dance. Rolleston's study says that the regard of these constellations is at the root of every religion of the world. Every cultural circle dance, every cultural folk lore goes back to being tied to the constellations. Rolleston looked at ancient India, Persia, China, Egypt, Greece, Rome. I think even regarding the Central America, South America, and they all have the same essence to the constellations. When I say essence, we would regard the Capricorn, where we get the word capricious or giddy, whimsical. Gid is like a goat, kid. So it's the top half of the body of a goat in a fish tail. What the heck is a goat and a fish? One of the other cultures shows a fish superimposed by the image of a goat. So all you see is the tail, but the goat leaping above it. So what Rolleston points out was that some of these pictures, you could tell were related to an original concept that got morphed or modified over time. John Dilday had said that we don't even know for sure that the constellations that we have a regard of right now were exactly the original, which is why we're going to go back and look at the brightest stars' names. As you said, Scorpio might have been an eagle. The Scorpion might have been an eagle. What the heck? I'm going to look at these in a different way, but I'm trying to establish, on one hand, the problem, just make people aware, and also make people aware that this is not sacrilege to look at the stars, at the constellations. To read a message in the stars apparently goes all the way back, according to Rolleston's work, to Adam. There were no other false deities at the time. Adam was trying to read a message. And if it wasn't Adam, many people believe it was Seth. There was Cain and Abel, and then there was Seth. Some people believe that Seth determined the constellations. Enoch was before Noah's flood. Enoch supposedly, according to Rolleston, supposedly there's no proof that it was the original, that Enoch, but people say, and it goes back hundreds and thousands of years, goes back before the flood, that Enoch wrote stuff down, saw stuff, visited up in the heavens, whatever. If it happened or not, I can't say. But supposedly stuff was written down and handed to Noah, who gave it to his son Shem, otherwise known as, that some people believe was Melchizedek, who taught Abraham, who then would have taught his son Isaac, who taught his son Jacob, who taught his son Joseph. And remember, Joseph had the dream of the sun and the moon bowing down and all the stars bowing down to him. And it's like, what an arrogant, who the heck do you think you are? And all his brothers hated him for that. He ended up sold into slavery in Egypt. Now, Abraham was approximately 2000 BC. And there's about a 600-year discrepancy when you get into ancient Egypt, so that Moshe was about 1600 BC. Joseph would have been in between there somewhere, but with a 600-year discrepancy going back 4,000 years from right now, there's, people don't know what's what. But the oldest known, what's called a planisphere picture, it was about, I think it was a 5 feet square with a circle around it in a place called Dendera. Rolleston has a picture. It was found in a certain building, and whether the building was built around it or whether somebody put it, nobody knows. But the point is, it goes back to about 2000 BC. So whether Abraham had something to do with it or Joseph had something to do with it. Joseph was the vizier, what's known as similar to a prime minister of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. He might have had a great regard, but there are Egyptian symbols. Rolleston talks about that. I'm not going to get into that, but the point is, the most ancient form and chronological order of these stars is consistent as far back as you go, and nobody knows where it came from. Everything is conjecture in terms of what it means, what the image actually is, why it's there, but all nations, all cultures seem to be, disqualifier there, exactly consistent. Now, here's one issue. Aquarius is the water pourer, but nobody knows whether it's about the man who's pouring the water or the urn out of which the water comes, or the fact that there's water coming out. Which one is the central theme? Nobody knows. Sagittarius. Okay, there's a half human, half horse. Or was it really a human riding a horse? It's gotten blended, but he's got a bow. Is it about the bow? But he's shooting an arrow. Is it about the arrow? Or is it the idea that an arrow shoots forth the verb action? Or is it the idea of a military action? Nobody knows. I'm setting up for just a perspective that I'm going to talk about. But what I'm giving people to understand here is that this is a wide open field of interest, of study, of exploration, pioneering work, because nobody, including E.W. Bullinger and Francis Rolleston, or me or Greg here, have any kind of hold on the reality. It's all been lost, completely twisted, spun. Like the whole story spins, looking at Polaris, the center point. The word mazar means to spin, become foul and corrupted. So here's the great dilemma. Why would Elohim put his word, his message, his voice in the stars, and then let it become corrupted to the point where we don't know whether they're Greek superheroes like Marvel Comics or a story of Jesus Christ marrying the church? What are you supposed to do with that? So I'll give you one more chance to say something, Greg, and then I'm going to roll into it. We're just about an hour, so we'll.
I think this would be a great place to break because it sets up. Yeah.
Yes, but I wanted to.
No, obviously. Yeah,
thing.
good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we have to understand is, before there were written text, the heavens have always existed. The stars up there, from what we know and what we can understand. Yes, there has been somewhat of a shift, I guess, off of the center of Polaris and the constellations. What the science prophets tell us, I guess. But all cultures, have this underlying theme of a Superman. The man that's up in heaven that's going to come down and save mankind. So where does this idea come from? Does this go all the way back to Eve when she said, I have gotten the man from Yahuwah. I've gotten the man from, or is she just saying, oh, I got a boy. Right. So it's all about the seed and that seed and what it means. And all religions and cultures wanted to be that man. They said, I'm the Pharaoh. I am God in the flesh. And they wanted to be, representative of that they're the rulers. And so all the nations have twisted it and turned it into their own stories and their own stuff. But you can see that in most religions, that's kind of the underlying theme behind a lot of the concepts. So this story was told long before, it was ever written down. And that's how stories back in the day, people used to really be able to memorize things, could memorize entire Bibles. And they would tell their stories passed down from generation to generation until, finally one day we have what we call the Bible. It was passed down from mouth to ear, from generation to generation. And so the story runs throughout most cultures and religions. And just from what I've seen, I see that this is a story that's within the text of the scriptures from what we have written down today. And so it's written down on paper, and it's written down, and there's parallels between what's in the heavenly temple versus what's on the earthly temple, and we as the spiritual temple. There's just correlations there, which, we discussed that the word of Yah is inexhaustible, and here we are digging into it. So
I might correlate what you're saying, that the word Pharaoh or Pa'aro literally was the concept of the God-man, the human deity. Also, the same concept was the Inca. The Inca are known as a people group, but the Inca himself was like the Pharaoh. He was a God-man deity, kind of like the Christian God-man Jesus the Christ. I understand, I've heard it said that there's been more killing of one Christian killing another Christian over the last 2,000 years, especially the first couple centuries, over the question, was that man a human that was part God, or God that was part human, or half and half, or some kind of mysterious blend? And people would latch onto these ideas and they kill each other. In the 1940s, there was an Emperor Hirohito of Japan. It's my understanding that the Japanese regarded him as a type of deity, not just, oh, he's the emperor, he's a big shot man. He was a supernatural sort of fellow. And the Chinese had a similar, what I'm saying is that it's pervasive around the earth. And if all religion and all of this kind of concept comes out of these stars, and if Yahuwah, the Elohim creator, Kanash Shamayim Ve'aretz, Kuf Nun Hey, maker, thus possessor of the heavens and the earth, then he is ultimately responsible for putting that story, embedding it into human subconsciousness, if not overt consciousness, and then saying, yeah, but if you tell the wrong story the wrong way, you're guilty of idolatry and now you're all going to die. It's like, what? Why did he do this to us? That's the human predicament. He puts a story. If we regard the story the wrong way, we're in big trouble. So for us to try to say, how in the world are we going to interpret this story? It's dangerous ground, slippery slope. And if we do this wrong, I'll tell you, I don't want to be guilty of leading myself astray or anybody else. Just so you know, this is a very, very serious, death-defying feat of intellectual gymnastics to try to look at these stars.
I think it comes down to the intent, right? If our intent is to understand the Father and his will for our lives, then that's okay. But if the intent is to manipulate people or self-gain, gather our own riches from it, or deceive people, mislead them, then that can be an issue. But yeah, it says not to follow these figures as far as worshiping and bowing down to them and turning them into their own gods. And that's what the other nations have done. It's like, well, I'll just take this god and he's going to be over the wind, and I'm going to take this god and he's going to be over the earth. And they've done these things with this, and we're trying to just understand the Father's heart. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He put everything around us, and like it does say in Job, that who can fathom these things? Who can understand how he's done these things or why he's done these things?
Well, we're about to answer that question here with with this study to a certain degree. So for Job to say with a rhetorical impossibility, who can fathom these things? It's like, wait a second. I believe that the basic premise is Elohim put them there to fathom, but as long as they spun out into idolatry, he kept it away from us. But I'm going to read something here at the beginning of the next talk in just a moment from Isaiah 44, verses 21 to 28. And I'm going to say that I believe that the voice that's in the Mazzaroth, the voice in these constellations, is a parallel voice to the voice in the Aleph Bet, which is keyed to the Mishkan pattern. And that's going to keep it on track, like two tracks of a railroad, keeping the train right where it's supposed to be. The train of thought on these two tracks of the alphabet, 22-letter sequence, and these 12 Mazzaroth, we're going to be looking at that.